Welcome everyone to the second Sparked Patient Summary Conformance Information session. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country to the traditional owners of the land on which we gathered today. For myself, it's the Kaurna people in Adelaide. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators and healers. So just for those that are perhaps new to this week, didn't attend last week's session, basically the goals of these patient summary conformance sessions to provide some background on fire conformance from basics through to bleeding edge. And that's in order to collectively understand what it means for patient summary to conform to an AU core and international patient summary profiles, because that's our objective. And to prepare a proposal of the conformance requirements for AU patient summary implementation guide for draft. That's due in August. So that's the outcome of these sessions. There are a number of sessions, but as a byproduct of that, we're expecting that we'll be able to identify and propose some changes to AU core and the fire IPS implementation guides to help ensure that we provide a meaningful, localizable and unambiguous conformance requirements in those specifications. So we have a number of sessions scheduled. This may not be limited to 6. It's certainly the 6 that I have planned to hold over the next few weeks, up until the 4th of July. Last week, we did an intro. This week, we're going to look at the IPS conformance statements in the implementation guide of the International Patient Summary. And then we're going to start workshopping to try and work through what it might look like from a data perspective in AU patient summary. And we've got other workshops planned for the next 4 weeks after today. So today we've got an overview of the International Patient Summary, and then we'll go into have a look at how the Australian Patient Summary IG relates back to the IPS and AU core, and then we start workshopping some of these conformance requirements. For starters, I'd like to do a Menti, so if you could find this Menti with this code, so go to menti.com, enter in that number. I'll start the Menti as well. And bear with me, present, I think is the button I need to do. So, or you can use your QR code and you can start entering in what your background and role is. Assuming everyone's got that Menti, please speak up if you're need that code again. Otherwise, it's actually at the top of this screen. Is there a different, am I not presenting anymore? There we go. Sorry. All right, so we've got a good range here. And I guess the probably a pretty good spectrum of that. These sessions are certainly here for standards development people, architects. We're certainly keen for software developers to be here to get their perspectives and project management, etc. So it looks like we've got the right people in the room. So have you attended one of these sessions before, just to get a bit of an understanding of who is actually attending here and what your roles are, experiences, sorry. So just waiting for another couple of people to add their item there. And if I don't know if there's been any more recent people attend, but we've certainly got more on the call than that's responding here. So if you want to join the Menti, the code up the top, menti.com. Next session, our next question, how well do you know AU Core? Okay, another couple of people still haven't got 9 out of 12. Okay, so some pretty good experience here with AU Core. That's great. And I've got 11 out of 12, so I might move on. And how well do you know IPS? So International Patient Summary. If you haven't done it yet, just looking into it, got a good implementation on it. Otherwise, yeah, we're real experts in it. So good range on people here as well. So that's great. We got 7 out of 12. Right, that seems to have slowed down. So I might move on to the last one. Just a bit of a general question about what you would like to get out of today's session. And I guess if you attended last week, I guess I'm just making sure there wasn't a lot of feedback. So just making sure that we're actually trying to achieve, delivering what you want out of these sessions. So I guess upfront, let me know what you're looking for, and then we might be able to adjust things if it's not actually delivering for you. But I'm assuming some of you will be wanting to actually get into the details soon, and we certainly will do that when we get to the second half of the session. Well, it's good that people are looking for some understanding. That's good. That's okay. All right. Well, I'm just leave that for another second or so. Couple more coming through. I think that's the last one for now. Yep, that's the last. Okay. Thank you for that feedback. Okay, so I'll start going through international patient summary conformance. And I guess just start by saying what is the IPS? We'll start diving into what the some of the design principles were around IPS, and in particular um, the conformance design principles. And then we'll start looking at some of the new work that the IPS group is doing around implementing obligations as part of must support. So IPS is actually based is a FIRE implementation guide. It's based on an international standard, ISO 27269, International Patient Summary. And for those that are perhaps not used to what those international standards look like, they're pretty much long paper documents that describe all of the concepts that are identified, and they might specify some structures and some conformance points. It actually doesn't give any details about how to implement something. It is purely an abstract specification around requirements. So it's basically specifies the core data set for a patient summary to support continuity of care for a person and coordination of their healthcare for the use case of unplanned cross-border care. It specifies the minimum non-exhaustive set of data elements required for the international patient summary. And as I said, it's an abstract specification, not an actual implementation guide. And this was actually written before there was a lot of FIRE implementations. And the first implementation of this ISO standard was a HL7 clinical document architecture, CDA, implementation guide. And subsequently, we now have a HL7 FIRE implementation guide as well. So in Europe in particular, there's quite a lot of implementations using CDA. And there's a number of implementations now with probably more so in America with FIRE IGs. The design principles page, which with the link down the bottom here, and I'm referencing here the ballot version that was released back in September, hence the URL. You'll see 2024 September ballot page, and it covers topics such as how to interpret must support. And as we learned last week, basically an IG needs to specify its own rules around what must support means when an element in a profile is marked or flagged as must support. So there's some textual narrative description around that in this page. There's also some guidance around what to do for empty sections and missing data, and then some guidance around narrative and language translation, which is obviously very important in a international patient summary. But one of the premises of IPS is the fact that you are able to read this patient summary at least, even if you can't process the details, and hence why translation is important. Okay, so in the ballot must support, the definition for must support is as follows. Straight reference from the ballot IG, that the implementers conforming to a particular profile in the IPS implementation guide shall be capable of producing values for the must support elements in the profile, shall be capable of processing resource instances containing must support data elements, including elements with missing data, without generating an error or causing the application to fail, and should be capable of displaying must support data elements for human use or processing them for other purposes. There's another couple of paragraphs, but I pause here for a moment and wonder, to you, is this clear what it means? Because this, for me, at a high level, yeah, that's okay. But
Well,
when you start digging deeper into it, is it absolutely clear?
which actor is the implementer? Is it a producer? That's why
You
it's not clear. It's
you
like
are
it
absolutely on the ball, Michael.
hasn't
Absolutely.
defined the
That's
actor.
Yep. So what implementers shall be capable? That was my first question. Perfectly. Any other comments from others on this dot point in particular, I guess?
I guess when you're saying what implementers shall be capable. So if you're going to implement something, hopefully you'll be able to recognize that all of a sudden, hey, I don't have a value here. I do have a default value to put in it. As for what I thought was a bit weird was that was a couple of shalls and then I had a should. But I guess in some instances you might be passing some binary stuff that you don't want to render for me. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I think your first point probably aligns very much with my second one here. So what if I don't
Yeah,
support
yeah.
that data element?
Well, yeah, I guess then as a business rule to recognize why do these systems not align in what they believe.
Yeah. So I guess more probably you went the other direction as well. What if I do have a value? What does that mean? So it's almost both sides. What if I don't have a value? What if you do have a value? Which value? And as you say, the business rules associated with that.
Yeah.
Um, and for me also, I mean, you can keep picking this to pieces. All right. But this is just a bit of an indication of the sorts of questions that when you dive in a little bit deeper, becomes very hard to find unambiguous statements so that you can actually do conformance testing, or even as guidance to an implementer. So the third point there is basically, what if you don't support the profile?
So does that mean when we're testing this stuff and we recognize some spots that all we can do is sort of present them and say, hey guys, look, you got this. What do you want to do?
Yeah. And then on the second dot point, it's like, for me, it's like, okay, what capable, what implementers shall be capable of processing? What does it mean? What does capable of processing mean? And which resources shall be processed? Is it only the IPS profiled resources that we need to process, or is it any resource? And then talking to your point around the should, now we're moving into the display, but which implementers need to display? Is it those that are consuming them? Yeah, that kind of makes sense. But is there an obligation on the person who's producing them as well? And if you're familiar with My Health Record, that is actually a conformance requirement in My Health Record, is that before you send this to the My Health Record, you need to display it to the user for them to attest it, even if it was automatically generated by the system. And we've got this term again, processing. Now, what's it processing mean in this dot point compared to the previous dot point, which also said shall be capable of processing? What's the difference? Do they mean the same kind of processing in this particular case? Obviously, we're talking about displaying here. So it's pretty loose. And we haven't really talked about it too much yet, but there's a requirement in IPS that you generate a rendering, for lack of a better word, of the detailed content and put that into a text element as narrative. So you should display based on this dot point. But what if you've already created the narrative? Should you display the detailed again, or just leave it to the narrative? So there's another couple of items here after those first 3 dot points, where it goes on and says now implementers conforming to an IPS document. Because previously we're talking about profiles. Now we're talking about the IPS document. Now, IPS document is actually something that is specified by the ISO standard, by the way. It is an actual and official term in the ISO standard. The term is not necessarily defined quite clearly in this IG, but apparently we shall be capable of supporting profiles under sections within this. And then they use the term IPS composition profile. At least now we actually do have an IPS composition profile. Second one is capable of populating profiles for allergy, medications, and problems information in an IPS document. So we go back to that undefined term, IPS document. So what is it? The IPS document, is that the IPS bundle? Because there is a concept of IPS bundle. There is a profile for IPS bundle. There is a profile for IPS composition. So what are these actually referring to? And in the second dot point, does this mean the sections? Or does it mean the entries within the section? Because it says profiles under the sections. But is it the entry element that we're talking about, or is it the text element under the section? Is it only the IPS profiles? Because the IPS actually allows generic things, just like document reference resources. There's no profile for a document reference in IPS, but we've got a profile for things like IPS allergy, IPS condition. So it's not clear about which profiles. Is it all the profiles or any profile within that section? So take medications, there are multiple profiles. So do we have to implement administrations as well as statements, as well as requests, as well as dispense, or just any? And what if the profile is not supported by my implementation? And what kind of support? Display, process, populate. So you get the idea, right? In AUPS, we do not require support for sections such as results and procedures and medication devices. We've agreed in Australia, we're not going to require support for that yet. So does that mean that we're non-compliant with IPS if we have an AUPS that doesn't support those particular sections? Because it says that we shall. And on the second one there, we've got, is this the IPS bundle that we're talking about, or both? And when shall this be populated? And again, does this mean the section or the entry? And that depends on whether we're actually talking about the bundle or the composition, because the bundle just has a set of resources in it. So it starts to really find it difficult to strictly test against this. And there was a lot of ballot response around this area from the September ballot. And one of those was to implement obligations. So obligations define how an IPS actor must support a given element. This is the new must support an obligation section that is available on the build server as the on the continuous build, and go to that design section, design conventions section. And actually, I think they might be restructuring it as we speak. So that may not be on there anymore. I think it has its own section called must support and obligations now. So let's try that out actually, just out of interest. So normally when you're looking in here, so I'm now off to the build server. Yeah, so that's the page that I was previously referring to, or where this went to when I clicked on that link. And in here, it's talking about some general stuff around slicing and the narrative and language translations, etc. But to actually find the must support now, you need to go to the obligations and the must support section, and it starts talking about it here. And there are some of these statements that we talk about. And the first one I'm talking about here is obligations define how an actor must support a given element. So that's literally where I'm referencing this material. And then there's the other section around empty sections and missing data. So these two sections used to live in that page. So just be aware, this is a moving target. It is a continuous integration build. So the second one is all must support elements in the publication, in this IG, are accompanied by an explicit obligation which identifies structured expectations for a given actor. So basically they're referring the meaning of any must support element to an explicit obligation extension, as we talked about last week. And for all obligations, no data should be populated or processed in any way that conflicts with original rules. So this then goes into, that's basically referring to things around consent and privacy and all those sorts of things. So they're not spelling them out, but they're just saying, you know, you've got to take into account those as well as your actual technical obligations as well. So one of the rules when they implement obligations that they took was, well, we're actually going to have a default set where everything that's must support will basically start off having a producer obligation of populate if known, or shall populate if known, and shall handle. And that was really based on the International Patient Access IG. So the International Patient Access IG recently got published, and it had obligations in it, and that because of the relationship between the IPA IG and the IPS IG, they felt that that was a good alignment, that we should adopt those as the default for every must support element within the IPS, and then we will work from there. A couple of other items here. Basically, it's intended to be localized. Hence, one of the goals of obligations is that we may be able to inherit those obligations into those localized IGs, and that the realms, such as Australia, can apply additional obligations or provide additional guidance on the definition of must support. However, we should identify and document these differences in our IG. So they're things that we just need to be aware of as we're proposing our new must support requirements. Okay, so actors. The two IPS actors that we have is a producer, and they just happen to qualify that as an IPS producer using their brackets. And they define it as a system which creates, resembles an IPS, including EHRs, PHRs, HIEs, and other applications that produce an IPS through automated processes or human curation. And then they have a consumer, an IPS consumer, which receives an IPS and uses the clinical document. And you'll notice that the type of systems that they refer to are the same set of systems. It's EHRs, PHRs, HIEs, websites, and basically any other application that might display or process the IPS document. So just stop me or put your hand up. I'm not monitoring the channel too much, so just speak up if you want to interject. So those default obligations I referred to, producer, we've got the populate if known, but on a consumer, we've not only gone for the shall handle, but we've also implemented, indicated the should display. So we go back to those original 3 dot points that we had as narrative originally. I guess what we really taking from this is that the first dot point was talking about shall populate is actually equivalent to a shall populate if known. The second one, which was talking about processing, meant that we shall handle. So that was actually targeted at the consumer. And the third one, that was the should, where they start talking about displaying and processing, they've actually identified it as a should display. So hopefully you would agree with me that this is much more clear about what my obligations are. Probably not perfect, but a hell of a lot better.
Well, it's pretty wild that it says it's a one-to-one, and you only populate it if you know it. So if you don't know it, what do you what do you know? That's
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
I'll come to that.
Okay.
All right. And it's legitimate. Absolute valid use case. All right. Because yes, it's mandatory. So, but if you're using this IPS in the context of where it is anonymized, then you cannot provide a subject. So how do you do that? And we'll come to that. In fact, we're coming straight to it now. Actually, no, we're not. So we're moving on now to those mandatory sections. And I didn't really spell this out back on earlier in the page. I sort of skipped over it. But basically in IPS, we've got 3 sections that are mandatory. Actually, and then that was actually the second set of dot points that we had there. The second dot point of the second set, where it was saying that these 3 sections are mandatory. And we have gone one step further than populate if known for these sections. We've actually said it's populate. So I'm not sure if you were there last week, David, but we were talking about the difference between populate and populate if known. It is, you need to be able to show that your system has at least some circumstances, some use cases, some scenario where you're capable of populating that section, even though you're potentially got some requirements around suppressing that data. And I, again, will come back to that. But that's the difference between populate if known and populate, is that from a conformance perspective, you've got to demonstrate during conformance that you actually are capable of doing it. You just can't ignore it all the time. So that's why these 3 have been strengthened. But not only at the section level, we go down to the entry level, and we need to also populate here. So now we're using the able to populate, not just the populate. You've got to demonstrate a little subtle difference between populate and able to populate. And it's difficult to explain. But basically the populate does inherit from populative known as well, but able to populate is not necessarily around the scenario. Like you always have to be able to support this. And you'll notice it's not actually on the entry itself. So the entry allows condition and document references, but we've actually got this obligation on the slice, the problem slice that uses the IPS conditions. So this is what they were talking about before. They were talking about IPS profiles. And that's what they've articulated here, is that you shall be able to populate a IPS condition. We're not going to force you though. If you don't have an IPS condition, because you've got a document reference, for example, we're not going to force you to turn that document reference into an IPS condition. And that's what the should's about. Now, there's some argument around this at the moment. It's not clear exactly what having this additional should populate if known is. It's a bit tricky. But basically what they're trying to achieve here is if you've got a condition IPS profile, i.e. if known, then you should populate it, but you shall be able to do it in some conformance scenario. So going back to what I was talking about, is it still clear? It's clearer, but this still maybe not straightforward or absolutely clear about the meaning, but we're attempting to do so. The consumer side is still handle and display. So final one is empty reason. So empty reason must support for these mandatory sections. And in this particular case, you'll notice that we've got a shall handle, but it should display. There is actually no obligation on the producer. And this was weird to me for a moment as well. But basically the empty reason is, if you think about AU Core, we've got those extensions that we use for indicating why something, the absent reason for missing data. So there is this approach here in IPS that is actually recommended to be used instead. And there's actually a condition, an invariant. You can see it up here that says either the section entry or the empty reason are present. So you have to populate this element or this element. Otherwise it's non-conformant. So if you don't have any entries, then you have to, for this particular section, problems, you have to indicate why. But yet we don't have an obligation on the producer to do so. And I'll come to that in a moment. But there is an obligation on the consumer to handle, and they should display if one exists. Now, why does it not have a producer obligation? It's because there is another way of being able to say why the section is empty, and that is by providing an entry, a problem, a condition IPS profile in particular, that has a SNOMED code in it to say that there are no known conditions. So there's two ways of doing it at the moment. The empty reason is actually a new way. Previously, we were using the entry approach to say no known conditions. Now we've got this one around empty reason. This is the actual recommended way, but you can still do it the other way. So this goes for not just problems, but also allergies and medications, those three mandatory sections. So I think I've been through most of this. The only point here, I guess, is that the section typically also has some text to explain the empty reason. Didn't show that too much, but if you have a look at the profile. And it's used when the entire section has been suppressed, not just an individual item has been suppressed. So if all conditions are missing for some reason, then that's when we use this empty section reason. But the text is still going to say there is no conditions or no information known. Some of the codes are nil known, not asked, information withheld, unavailable, not stated. Not sure what closed means. I'd have to have a look at the spec. And finally, the resources may also be used to assert the known absence of data rather than the empty reason. So this is what I was alluding to. So we can actually use a condition resource or a medication resource or an allergy resource with an appropriate SNOMED code to say there are no known allergies or medications, etc. So very quickly, because I'm running out of time, IPS recommended sections just revert back to the if known, handle, and display requirements. And on the entries, again, we've got populate if known, handle, and display. And that goes for the recommended sections are immunizations, results, procedures, and medical devices. So now we get to the fact that Australia only wants to do the immunizations. We don't want to provide those other three recommendations at this point in time in R1. That gives us now the channel to be able to say, well, it's a shall populate if known scenario. So for us, they're not known because we're not populating those, we think. And we will need to refine that as part of our must support or conformance requirements for AUPS. So going back to those empty sections and missing data elements, basically, we've got the optional data elements here. So for optional data elements, you just don't provide them, okay? But for required elements, you have to provide something, and this is where we use those absent reason codes in those particular scenarios. So it's the same rules effectively as what we've got in AU core. So we're quite aligned here. The only difference is we now have the new section empty flag, and it just means that where it's mandatory, David, we have to provide something and we have to say why. Does that answer your question before, David? I'll come to you in a sec, Marika.
Yep, good.
Cool. Marika?
Just on the optional first line, you've said the data element is omitted if the producer doesn't have data to be included in IPS.
Yeah, or you're not allowed to. If there's a privacy, you just omit it because it's optional. So it's optional. We don't even want to say that there was something missing here.
The question I actually have was would it still be a valid conformant implementation for the optional sections to still provide a empty reason?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Perfect.
Yep. I mean, the recommendation is you don't. But if you really want to, there's nothing saying you shall not.
Yeah, I think for us in our implementation, it was a nice way to flag for the optional sections that yes, actually we have implemented something here and there is nothing there.
Yeah. But it is a contentious point because some people say even just saying that there is some data
Yeah,
is
that
actually potentially um,
a security risk.
a security risk. Yep.
That's a
So it
valid.
depends on the scenario. So if it's just missing data, it might be useful to say, oh, there's missing data. But if it's something that is like mask data, then if go back to AU core rules, if the person is allowed to know that there's masked data, then you say it's masked. Otherwise, you just basically say it's missing. But for an optional one, you would just omit it. But if you literally want to say it's masked, then you could say it's masked. But again, keep in mind the missing section is where the entire section is empty, not individual elements.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Heath.
But from a producer's, yeah, I think we've already got no data. Data are not allowed to be shared, or because data are available are not pertinent within the scope. Yeah. Okay. So I'm way behind time, and I do want to at least move on to a little bit of extra stuff. So I won't go into translation. You can read that yourself. I was going to go through a little bit on how IPS relates to, or AUPS relates to the other standards. But basically, in summary, what we're trying to say here is that in AU Core, we are trying to align with both IPS and AU Core. So we're bringing in our AU Core profiles, we're leveraging the IPS profiles, and we want to align with both of those. Each of those standards themselves have conformance rules. They've got their resource types, they've got their actor definitions, we've got their profiles, we've got our support obligations, we've got capability statements, which gives us both data and integration and interaction conformance capabilities. In IPS, we also have operations that are defined. That's the dollar summary. In the capability statement, it also indicates that you should be using or can use the dollar ref that's defined in the IPA's implementation guide. But at the moment, AU patient summary we've got our profiles, we're working on those profiles. We've got some conformance narrative around what must support means. But what else do we need to make it clear? But do we really need it in R1? And is there stuff that we can use from those existing IGs? What can we reuse? And how do we reuse it is probably the next question. But for now, what is it that we would like to reuse? So this is where I want to do a workshop. Now I only got 10 minutes, but I will start to through the workshop, and we'll pick it up next week. But I'm hoping that was a good summary for IPS for us to sort of move into this next stage, even though I didn't get as far as I wanted, but we'll kick off into it. So the workshopping side of things now, we're just looking at the data side. So what are the data conformance requirements at the moment? So what I was alluding to in that previous slide is that we've got data and interaction conformance at the moment in AU Core. We're just focusing on the data conformance bit. So must support missing data, etc. So we'll just skip back to that same Minty again. We'll go through a couple of questions. We see how many of these we can get through in the next 10 minutes. So what I'm keen for you to do is just give me a bit of a summary of what are your use cases for patient summary. This one's just a word cloud, and I'm not sure if there's It looks like there's less rather than more people, but that's okay. So you should have, I'm not sure if you can, once you've submitted, whether you can submit another one or not, but when it comes to things like, I guess the sorts of things I was looking for were things like referral from a GP, rather than just GP. So be a little bit more descriptive for those that perhaps haven't already, or see if you can. What is HMRS? Someone qualify that one for me?
Hey, Hank, it's just me, Charlotte from Dispense Works. HMR is a home medication review. It's something community pharmacists can complete.
Okay, great, thank you. So that's an interesting use case. That's great. People need a bit more time. We've only got 6 responses there. Yep. Okay. International travel interstate. Okay, so dispensing seems to be a common one. Referral seems to be a common one. So what I'm looking for now is, for those use cases that you've mentioned, what kind of data related functions are we talking about? Are we going to system generated, authored? So, from think about what you're intending to implement or have implemented. What are the specific functions associated with the patient summary that you're looking to do? So you want simply just to display it, or can you allow to print it? Will you store it, or you're just going to extract some data out of it? Or have you got some new function that, or feature that you're wanting to do to it that perhaps I haven't thought about here? You can use the other in that, and we can discuss that briefly. So sharing looks like it's common here.
If there's a question in the chat, what's the difference between authored and generated?
Yep, so basically generated is where the system is going to generate it, compared to where an actual user, an actual author, a clinician will be, or could be the patient themselves authoring a. So it's a human versus a computer. Now there may be a combination of the two. So you might start with a generated one and then refine that. Select both. It's good to see aggregation there. That's bringing together. And I guess the couple of ideas that I've had there, that might be a couple where you're aggregating from multiple databases into a patient summary, or potentially aggregating from multiple patient summaries into another patient summary. Okay, we've got 8 out of 14. So unless someone's nearly about to submit, I might move on. Okay, what primary resource profiles need to be implemented to conform to AU patient summary? So what's the primary profile? Again, this is probably expecting a little bit of background knowledge around what is IPS, what is an AU patient summary. We're talking about compositions that have sections, but of course, when we talk about an IPS document, we're talking about the bundle that contains the composition and all the other entries that are referenced within the sections. So what's the primary one that we actually need to conform to? So this one's a little bit slow. And that might be just because it's probably targeting people with a little bit more background, but that's okay. But if anyone's still not clear about the question and would like to answer it, I can attempt to answer it a bit, compose the question a bit better. No, we're okay. All right. So what are the conformance requirements for your patient summary? So this is a slightly open question. It's still a word cloud, so you're limited in the number of words, but what do you think the data conformance requirements are for your use case for patient summary? What do you think are the minimum requirements to conform to data? And it is deliberately open here, so I'm take any answer. No, there's no wrong or right. Okay. You still thinking about that, or we're struggling with this question? It's okay if you are.
I think it's a tough one, actually, yeah.
And to be honest, I really didn't know where this was going to go. I should have put that disclaimer up before I even started this. So, oh, I mean, we're time constrained, but you know, this is the first time we've kind of gone through this in this sort of forum, so it was challenging to come up with the right way of approaching this. So I think it is time, and I think that based on that, I think this is a good place to finish. I'll leave this sort of open a little bit if you're still thinking and wanting to submit something. But I guess question on notice. Has the last 10 minutes in particular been a little bit challenging to start thinking about this? And because I guess, you know, we wanted to start to engage with you and get some feedback and as early as possible so that we start moving into this workshops. And as you can see with the schedule, we're going to continue workshopping for this over the next few weeks. So it's going to be sort of along these lines, and I will really, I guess based on this, probably need to lean on you a little bit to perhaps suggest on how we progress with some of these sessions. How do we get to go back to those goals that we've got, which is to come up with a proposal on what our conformance requirements are for AUPS. how we can actually achieve that. And I'm happy to take perhaps messages through Zulip, DMs. We can do an open topic on this, but we've got these goals, and we want your input on them to try and get to that point of coming up with a set of conformance requirements. What does must support mean? What do we do with missing data? What are our actors? Do we need actors? And to be honest, we may start with just a few dot points that are narrative in this release 1. And if we're happy with that, then that's okay for release 1. We can refine that further. This is just a public comment, by the way. It's not even a release yet. So we can have a more open conversation about this next week. And there are some more minties. We can rerun these same minties, see if you got different answers next week. I'll see if I can think about refining the questions a little bit so they're a little bit easier. But what's your sort of feedback, I guess, from today? And any suggestions on how we might do it differently next week, for example? This won't be next week, it'll be in 2 weeks' time. But David, Marika, Michael, any suggestions? Neil?
Possibly some more. The last couple of questions were tricky because they were very open-ended. Possibly some more direction or context provided before those questions into what you're actually trying to probe. That would be my thought.
Yep.
I guess from my angle, I'm still interested in the industry, you might say. I'm still very much standards, sort of watching the way the patterns are working. So my scenarios with the PHN are GP, and everyone seems, when we start talking about GPs, that's relative. So that makes sense to me. But I'm just sort of, I guess I'm trying to get used to the pattern and the language.
I was interested because I thought we got to a good point with producers and consumers, which to me makes sense, and then looking at what values they might have for the elements, but then we backed away and went really abstract at the end. So I thought maybe if you had that abstract stuff at the start and then sort of move into the actual detail.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I was doing at the beginning was showing you where IPS is at. And because we're looking to align with IPS or potentially even derive from it or reuse from it, how do we do that? So I take your point, Michael, but they were more about, I guess, examples of conformance. And, as I started out with narrative, how to interpret it to something that was more structured. But having said that, we've gone through that process with AU Core, and we actually have a narrative for profile only, which is data. So there's no interactions associated with that. So there are no necessarily actors associated with profile only, but we've still got pretty clear, I would argue, still pretty clear conformance requirements for profile only. I guess that's what we're trying to get to with a UPS, at least for this first draft, because we may not have enough time to get all of the details correct. Still, IPS is still a moving target as far as its obligations are concerned. So we may not be able to reuse those obligations in IPS yet. So in the meantime, what do we do?
Now that's a fair point too. So Until we get IPS settled, it's hard to say exactly what ours are going to be.
Yeah. And we may not know what interactions we're going to be supporting yet either. So for those that are just wanting to produce and consume without any specific interactions, i.e. data only, what is it that we actually need to conform to if I'm just producing or consuming it? What are the data requirements for that? That's, I guess, the goal. So thanks for your feedback. I appreciate it. Sorry I went over time, but I just did. That was a challenging session, and I just wanted to try and work out how to go about it for the next time. So as I said, I'm open to your feedback through through various channels, whether it's open or not. What I might do is open up a topic and to basically ask the question on how we're going with these sessions for now, and any suggestions on moving forward. And Marika, I'll take you on. We did actually, we deliberately left it open, but I take on your point that, you know, we're also struggling to work out, we don't want to lead too much. We want it to be community driven. So we don't necessarily want to put the answers in your mouth, if you like. But given that your feedback, I guess we can look at that, and I'd love to work with you around trying to do that perhaps, and through these sessions. Thank you, everyone. We'll stop recording now, and we'll
Thank you.
see you the next session in 2 weeks.